Most countries have laws providing for protection of specific species. They may use different tools, from incentives for habitat conservation to criminalization of exploitation or trade. But the common thread is that this type of regulation defines what is permitted or prohibited in terms of the species involved, rather than where the activity takes place. One of the most heavily regulated activities involving species is taking. Taking includes hunting, killing, catching, gathering, fishing, poisoning, harvesting, snaring, cutting, plucking, or removing all or part of a member of a protected species. It may include harassing, disturbing, or otherwise harming a species or its eggs. In some jurisdictions, actions that cause a protected plant or animal to die, such as use of a pesticide, can also be considered a taking. Taking of strictly protected or endangered species is often entirely prohibited, and in many cases it is a crime. More common species may be subject to different regulatory requirements. A hunting or fishing license may be required, or hunting may only be allowed in certain seasons. Regulations may establish quotas for the number of specimen that can be removed. The size and gender of the specimen may be regulated. For example, regulations could only allow taking of fish over 12 inches long, or only male deer. This is to protect the natural reproductive and growth cycle of the population. Even for strictly protected populations, some taking may be allowed under specific circumstances. Traditional use by indigenous or local communities may be allowed, or trophy hunting under controlled conditions and subject to strict quotas may be used to generate revenue for conservation. In addition to regulating taking of species, laws can also regulate possession, processing, or transport of protected species. This type of regulation helps address taking along the trade chain. It facilitates enforcement, and it is usually easier to prove possession than to prove that someone killed a particular specimen. It also addresses the problem that the people and organizations most responsible for loss of species are not always the people holding the gun. Like taking, possession of a specimen or part of an endangered species can be a criminal offense. When people hear this, they often ask, but what if it isn't mine? What if someone put something in my bag and I'm caught with it? Can I go to jail? Usually the law takes this into consideration. Possession requires both physical possession, corpus, and intention to possess, animus. In short, you can't be convicted of possessing something if you don't know you have it. The second question is a little harder. What if I have something, but I don't know it's illegal? This is the scenario of the tourist who buys a piece of ivory or conch shell at a market, or the subsistence hunter who shoots the wrong type of antelope. In this case, the legal question is more complicated, but there is a general principle in many jurisdictions that ignorance of the law is no excuse. A third category of species-based regulation relates to trade. Many jurisdictions regulate selling, offering for sale, supplying, buying, bartering, trading, and even donation of products or specimens of protected species. This type of regulation can cover domestic or international trade. In the case of international trade, legislation can create a system of permits or certificates for import or export of protected species. These do not need to be species that are native to the regulating country, but can also apply to imported species. The U.S. Lacey Act, for example, provides that it is unlawful to trade in wildlife taken, possessed, transported, or sold in violation of any law or regulation of any state, or in violation of any foreign law. Sometimes the list of species subject to regulation may need to change depending on the vulnerability of different species. The list of protected species may be regularly updated by a government agency. It may incorporate by reference an international list, such as the IUCN Red List, or species listed under the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species. Listing or delisting a species may be subject to a regulatory process that provides opportunities for public consultation. It is important for agents involved in enforcement and the judicial process to be up to date and have the capacity to correctly identify protected species. Enforcement can be easiest when all taking or possession of a specific species is prohibited. When some taking is permitted, subject to regulations, it is vital to be able to distinguish between legally and illegally taken specimens. This can be facilitated by requirements for certificates or other appropriate documentation. But there can always be problems of forged certificates or permits, or exceeding allowed quotas.